Namaste students. How are you all? I hope everyone is fine. In the previous classes, we learned about China, two different phases. The rise of the Communist Party of China, Vietnam against two colonizers, emergence of Vietnamese nationalism. In today's class, you are going to learn some interesting developments about the entry of the US into the war. Dear students, do you know what learning outcomes we are going to discuss in this session? At the end of this session, you will be able to understand how the National Liberation Front fought for the unification of the country with the help of the Ho Chi Minh government, and we shall discuss how the prolongation of the war created strong reactions even within the US. Children, are you all attentive? Our learning outcomes are clear. Now, all of you be ready with your textbook, pen and a notebook. Pause the video and watch again. If clarity is required, place your queries in the comment box. Now, instructions are clear that what you should have. Shall we move on to the next topic? Here, we go with today's agenda. First, we shall start with words of the day, followed by pre-conceptual discussion. Later, we will have a discussion on the US entry into the war and the effect of the war was felt in the US. Finally, there will be a recapitulation. Children, are you all ready to gear up? We have a clear action plan to move on. Now, let me start discussing words of the day. Today's first word is equip. Verb. Its textbook usage is thousands of the US troops arrived equipped with heavy weapons. Its meaning is to provide yourself somebody or something with the things that are needed for a particular purpose or activity. Its derivative is equipment, noun. Its usage is the equipment of the photographic studio was expensive. Second word is draft, verb. Its textbook usage is when the youth were drafted for the war, the anger spread. Its meaning is to choose people and send them somewhere for a special task. Its derivative is draft, noun. Its usage is extra police are drafted into the crowd. Children, it is quite interesting to learn 2 words a day. Now, let us recall what we had discussions in the previous class. By the 1920s, students were forming various political parties such as the Party of Young Annam and publishing nationalist journals such as the Annamese Student. For many of the students, primary objective was to drive out the French from Vietnam, overthrow the puppet emperor and re-establish the Nguyen dynasty that had been deposed by the French. The Vietnamese were persuaded to accept the division of the country. North and South were split. Ho Chi Minh and the communists took power in the North. The South was handed over to an old emperor who was soon ousted by Ngo Dinh Diem. However, after 1954, a new era of land reforms was started in North Vietnam. Land of the landlords was confiscated and distributed among the landless peasants and poor peasants. Now, let us watch a video for better understanding. With the help of the Ho Chi Minh government in the north, the National Liberation Front fought for the unification of the country. The US got afraid by seeing this alliance. Worried about communists gaining power, it decided to intervene decisively, sending in troops and arms. Now, let us watch a video for better understanding.
The entry of the US into the war. The entry of the US into the war proved to be fatal to both the Americans as well as the Vietnamese. Both of them faced a terrible loss of life and property. From 1965 to 1972, over 34 lakh US service personnel fought in Vietnam. Even though the US had advanced technology and good medical supplies, casualties were high. About 47,244 died in battle and 3,03,704 were wounded. About 23,014 suffered 100% disability. This phase of struggle with the US was brutal. Thousands of US troops arrived equipped with heavy weapons and tanks and backed by the most powerful bombers of time P-52s. The widespread attacks and use of chemical weapons, napalm against orange and phosphorus bombs destroyed many villages and decimated jungles. The war grew out of a fear among US policy planners that the victory of the Ho Chi Minh government would start a domino effect and that communist governments would be established in other countries in the area. They underestimated the power of nationalism to move people to action, inspired them to sacrifice their home and family, live under horrific conditions, and fight for independence. The most technologically advanced country in the world underestimated the power of a small country to fight. The effect of the war was felt within the US as well. Many were critical of the government for getting involved in a war that they saw as indefinable. When the youth were drafted for the war, the anger spread. The prolongation of the war created strong reactions even within the US. The widespread questioning of government policy strengthened moves to negotiate an end to the war. A peace settlement was signed in Paris in January 1974. This ended conflict with the US, but fighting between the Saigon regime and the NLF continued. The NLF occupied the presidential palace in Saigon on 30th August 1975 and finally unified Vietnam. Agent Orange, the deadly poison. Agent Orange is a defoliant, a plant killer, so called because it was stored in drums marking with an orange band. Between 1961 and 1971, some 11 million gallons of this chemical was sprayed from cargo planes by US. Their plan was to destroy forests and fields so that it would be easier to kill if there was no jungle cover for people to hide. Over 14% of country's farmland was affected by this poison. Its effect has been staggering, continuing to affect people till today. Dioxin, an element of Agent Orange, is known as cause cancer and brain damage in children, and according to a study, is also the cause of the high incidence of deformities found in the sprayed areas. The tonnage of bombs, including chemical arms, used during the US intervention in Vietnam exceeds that used throughout the Second World War.
Next, the entry of the US into the war. With the help of the Ho Chi Minh government in the north, the NLF fought for the unification of the country. The US was afraid of this unification. It was worried that communists would become powerful in Vietnam, so it decided to interfere in this unification by sending its two-point arms. When the Vietnamese decided to become as a unification, America feared about this unification. It was worried the communists would become powerful in Vietnam, so it decided to interfere in the unification by sending its troops and arms. The US entry into the war marked a new phase in the Vietnamese struggle. It proved costly to the Vietnamese as well as to the Americans. From 1965 to 1972, over 34 lakhs US Army people fought in Vietnam. Even though the US had advanced technology and good medical supplies, A large number of army people died. About 47,244 died in battle and 3,03,704 wounded. Of those wounded, 23,014 were listed by the Vietnamese administration to be 100% disabled. It was a critical situation between the US and Vietnam when the America feared about the communism is going to develop in the Vietnam. No, so it entered into the war and it started against to the Vietnam. Not only the Vietnam people suffered, even the American soldiers and American common civilians, Vietnam common civilians disabled and suffered with this war. This phase of struggle with the US was brutal. Thousands of US troops arrived in Vietnam, equipped with heavy weapons and tanks. They also had the most powerful bombers of the time. The B 52s, the wide the spread attacks and use of chemical weapons destroyed many villages and decimated jungles. Vietnamese civilians died in large numbers in these attacks. Some of the chemical weapons used by US were napalm, a deadly bomb which caused intense damage to humans, Agent Orange, which destroyed plants and trees and made the land barren for a long time, and phosphorus bombs. It was a situation in the Vietnam by America. They were used the napalm. You have a question, what is meant by napalm? A deadly bomb which caused intense damage to humans. And you have one more question, what is Agent Orange, which destroyed plants and trees and made the land barren for a long time, and it was there in the orange colored drums, so it called as a Agent Orange, and they were used the phosphorus bombs also. The US policy planners had underestimated the power of nationalism in Vietnam. The nationalism moved people to action, inspired them to sacrifice their home and family, live under horrific conditions, and fought for independence. They underestimated the power of small country to fight the most technologically advanced country in the world. They also underestimated the commitment of the lakhs of poor peasants who had recently received their piece of land. After generations of exploitation by landlords, these peasants were inspired by nationalism and land reforms. They played the most crucial role in the defeating the most powerful army in the world. Vietnam is a small country, even though it ready to fight against the America because it inspired by their nationalism and land reforms. Now, even the US policy planners had underestimated the power of nationalism in Vietnam. The effect of the war was felt within the US as well. Many people criticized the government for getting involved in a war that was hard to defend. When the youth were selected to the war and anger spread, the continuation of the war created strong reactions even within the US. Many people questioned the government policy and this helped to negotiate an end to the war. A peace settlement was signed in Paris in January 1974. This ended the conflict with the US, but fighting between the Saigon regime and NLF continued. The NLF occupied the presidential palace in Saigon on 13th April 1975 and finally unified Vietnam. You have a question here. When Vietnam unified on 30th April 1975. One more. When did the Paris Agreement between the America and Vietnam in 1974 at Paris? And the Vietnam actually a small country, even though they fought a lot against the US, the finally there is a mass reaction in the America against the American government because a small country is suffering with American army. Due to these reasons, America came down and it conducted negotiations with Vietnam and given the relaxation to the Vietnam from America. If you see the story of Vietnam, Vietnam fought against the three countries, that was the first French, then after the Japan, then later about America. But with the three countries it succeeded with their unity, especially by the farmers.
Now let us summarize what we have discussed till now. The US entry into the war marked a new phase that proved costly to the Vietnamese as well as to the Americans. This phase of struggle with the US was brutal. Thousands of the US troops arrived equipped with heavy weapons and tanks and backed by the most powerful bombers of the time, B 52s. The widespread attacks and use of chemical weapons, napalm, a deadly bomb which caused intense damage to humans, Agent Orange, which destroyed plants and trees and made the land barren for a long time, and phosphorus bombs destroyed many villages and decimated jungles. The effect of the war was felt within the US as well. Many were critical of the government for getting involved in a war that they saw as indefensible. The National Liberation Front occupied the presidential palace in Saigon on 30th April 1975 and finally unified Vietnam. I hope you all have understood what we have discussed till now. In the next class, let us discuss Nigeria forming unity against the colonizers. Thank you.